My 6-year-old daughter told me my husband was stealing my money, and it turned out she was the only one brave enough to save us both. I'm a head nurse at a private hospital in Denver. I work 12-hour shifts, sometimes more, kind of exhausting that makes you fall asleep in your scrubs before you can even take a shower. I loved it. I was good at it, and I thought I had everything figured out. A career I'd fought for, a daughter who was my whole world, and a husband I trusted. That Tuesday night, I dragged myself through the front door at nearly midnight. My feet were killing me, and all I wanted was to check on Emma, and Tyler was supposed to be at some conference in Las Vegas. Another business, another week of me handling everything alone. But Emma was awake, sitting on the couch in her little pink pajamas, clutching her stuffed bear, waiting for me. The moment she saw me, her eyes filled with tears, and my heart just stopped. I dropped my bag and knelt down beside her, tucking her hair behind her ear. She looked at me with this expression that was way too serious for a 6-year-old. Then she leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear, and whispered the words that would destroy my marriage and save my life. She told me her daddy had a girlfriend, and that they were taking all my money. I remember the cold shock that ran through my body, the way my hands started shaking, the strange ringing in my ears. This had to be a misunderstanding. Kids get confused. They overhear things and mix them up. But when I asked her why she was saying this, Emma didn't hesitate. She took my hand and led me to her bedroom, reached under her mattress, and pulled out a tablet. Tyler's old iPad, the one he said he'd sold months ago. She told me he'd forgotten it there, and she'd seen the messages while trying to. My little girl handed me this device with her hands, and I could see in her face that she knew this was big. She knew it was bad. I opened the Messages app, and what I saw made the room spin. Conversations between Tyler and someone saved as V with a heart, explicit texts, photos I will never be able to unsee, plans for trips, jokes about their future together, and then, buried in the thread, the sentence that made my blood turn to ice. Tyler had written that he'd gotten another $15,000 that day. He called me an idiot who never checks the accounts. And this V person responded with excitement, saying they just needed a few more months and they'd have enough to disappear. That I worked so much I wouldn't even notice until it was too late. They'd been planning this for over a year, draining our accounts, transferring my money into secret accounts, plotting their escape with everything I'd worked for. I looked at Emma, and she was watching me with those big, scared eyes, asking if I was crying. I wiped my face and told her she did the right thing, that this was our secret now, that she couldn't tell Daddy she'd shown me the tablet. This is a long story, and it gets worse before it gets better. If you want to know exactly how I took everything back from the man who tried to rob me blind, go ahead and follow along here. You'll want to see how this ends. After Emma finally fell asleep that night, I sat on my bedroom floor with that tablet in my hands, and I couldn't stop shaking. I read every single message, every photo, every plan. It was like watching a horror movie, except the monster was my husband and the victim, the woman he was texting. This V person, her name was Vanessa. I found that out from a screenshot Tyler had sent her of a hotel reservation. Vanessa Cole, 24 years old, according to her Instagram profile that I found after some digging. A receptionist at his office building. She was young, pretty in that effortless way I hadn't been in years. And she talked about me like I was an obstacle, an annoying detail they had to work around. One message made me physically sick. Vanessa had written that she felt a little bad sometimes, knowing he was married with a kid. Tyler's response was what broke something inside me. He told her not to worry, that I was so focused on my job I barely noticed him anymore anyway. That our marriage had been dead for years, that Emma would be fine because kids are resilient. He talked about my daughter, our daughter, like she was just another inconvenience in his plan to steal from me and run away with his mistress. I wanted to scream, wanted to throw that tablet against the wall. But Emma was sleeping in the next room and I couldn't let her hear me fall apart. So I sat there in the dark, crying silently, scrolling through evidence of my husband's betrayal until my eyes. 4 a.m, the sadness started turning into something else, something sharper, yes, but also couldn't confront, not yet. If I did, he'd know I'd found out, and he'd disappear with whatever money he'd already stolen. Maybe he'd grab Emma and threaten me with custody. Maybe he'd destroy evidence. I'd watched enough crime shows to know that the worst thing you can do when you discover something is tip off the other person. I needed help, professional help. At 6 a.m., I called my best friend. She's a family law attorney, and we've been close since college. The phone rang 4 times, and when she finally answered, her voice was thick with sleep. I didn't even say hello. I just said her name and told her I needed her right now, that it was an emergency. Lauren knows me well enough to understand I don't use that word lightly. She told me she'd be at my house in an hour. I spent that hour making coffee I couldn't drink. When Lauren arrived, I'd barely unlocked the door before the words started pouring out. I showed her the tablet, the messages, the photos, the plans. Lauren's face went from confused to shocked to absolutely furious in about 30 seconds. She's the kind of person who stays calm in a crisis, but I saw her hands clench into fists as she read Tyler's messages. When she looked up at me, her voice was steady but cold as ice. She told me this wasn't just infidelity, this was financial abuse, possibly fraud, and if Tyler had been moving money without my knowledge or consent, he could be facing serious legal consequences. Then she asked the question I'd been too scared to consider. How much did I think he'd taken? I realized in that moment how stupid I'd been. Tyler had always handled our finance. He said it made sense since he worked in sales and understood. He paid the bills, managed our accounts, filed our taxes. I just worked my shifts and assumed everything was fine. I trusted him completely. That trust was about to cost me everything. Lauren made 2 phone calls right there in my kitchen. The first was to her office, telling them she was taking a personal day. The second was to someone named Derek Stone. She told me Derek was a private investigator she'd worked with before, that he specialized in financial fraud cases, and that if Tyler had been stealing from me, Derek would find out exactly how much and where it went. Derek showed up an hour later. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and this calm, methodical way of speaking that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, this nightmare could be fixed. I showed him everything on the tablet. He photographed each message, each transaction screenshot, each piece of evidence. Then he asked for access to my bank accounts, credit cards, and any financial documents I could find. I gave him everything. My hands were still shaking as I logged into accounts I hadn't checked in months, maybe years. Derek worked fast. He had software that could track transactions, cross-reference accounts, identify patterns. Within 2 hours, he'd found the first secret account. Tyler had opened it 8 months ago using our home address, but only his name. He'd been transferring money there in small amounts at first, $500 here, $1,000 there, amounts small enough that I wouldn't notice in our regular spending. But recently, the transfers had gotten bigger, $3,000, $7,000, $15,000 at a time. Lauren asked Derek how much he thought Tyler had taken in total. Derek didn't answer right away. He kept typing, kept searching, and when he finally looked up at us, his expression told me everything I needed to know. It was bad. Really bad. But he needed another day to get a picture, to find all the accounts, to trace every transaction, to build a case that would hold up in court. I felt like I was drowning, but Lauren grabbed my hand and looked me straight in the eye. She told me we were going to fix this, that Tyler had made a mistake by underestimating me, and that by the time we were done, he'd regret ever thinking he could get away with this. I wanted to believe her, but mostly, I just wanted to know one thing. How much of my life had Tyler stolen? 48 hours after Derek started digging, he called me into Lauren's office downtown. I'd just finished a night shift, and I was running on maybe 3 hours of sleep and too much coffee. But the second I walked into that conference room and saw their faces, I knew the news was worse than I'd imagined. Derek had printed out everything. Bank statements, transaction records, loan documents, credit reports. The papers were spread across the table like evidence at a crime scene, which, I guess, is exactly what it was. He told me to sit down. I did, even though my legs already felt weak. Then he told me the number, $127,000. That's how much Tyler had stolen from me over the past 18 months. I couldn't breathe. That amount didn't even seem real. I made good money as a head nurse, but that was years of savings. Money I'd put away for Emma's college fund, for emergencies, for our money I'd earned working doubles and holidays and overnight shifts while Tyler was supposedly building his career. Except he wasn't building anything. He was tearing down everything Derek walked me through it, document by document. Tyler had opened 3 separate accounts, 2 in his name, 1 in Vanessa's name. He'd been siphoning money from our joint checking account, from my personal savings, even from the college fund I'd set up for Emma when she was born. But that wasn't even the worst part. Derek slid another document across the table, a loan application, $50,000, using our house as collateral. The signature at the bottom looked like mine, but I'd never seen this paperwork before in my life. My voice came out as barely a whisper when I asked what this meant. Lauren answered, and her tone was deadly serious. Tyler had forged my signature. He'd taken out a loan against our home, the home I'd bought before we even got married, the home that was in my name alone, and he'd committed fraud to do it. That's when Derek told me this wasn't just a divorce case. This was criminal, federal criminal. Forgery, fraud, identity theft, embezzlement of marital assets. Tyler could be facing up to 10 years in prison. I felt this strange disconnect, like I was watching this happen to someone else. How does someone you sleep next to every night, someone you made a child with, someone you trusted with everything, how does that person look you in the eye and rob you blind? Lauren started talking about strategy. She said we couldn't let Tyler know what we'd discovered. Not yet. If he suspected we were onto him, he'd run. He'd take whatever money was left and disappear with Vanessa before we could stop him. Or worse, he'd try to take... That thought snapped me back to reality. My daughter. I would die before I let him use her as leverage. Derek had already started working on freezing Tyler's secret accounts through legal channels, but it would take a few days to get the court orders in place. In the meantime, Lauren told me what I needed to do. Move any remaining money from our joint accounts into a new account in only my name. Change my passwords, document everything, and most importantly, act normal. That last part might have been the hardest thing anyone had ever asked me to do. Tyler came home from his business trip that Thursday evening. He walked through the door with his suitcase, that easy smile on his face, and he kissed me like nothing was wrong, asked me how my week had been, told me about his meetings and the clients he'd impressed. Every word out of his mouth was a lie. Derek had already confirmed Tyler hadn't been in Las Vegas at all. He'd been at a resort in Scottsdale with Vanessa, spending another $8,000 of my money on room service and spa treatments and bottles of wine I was paying for. I stood there in our kitchen, watching him lie to my face, and I had to force myself to smile back, to ask about his trip, to pretend I still believed. Inside, I was screaming. That night, after Tyler fell asleep, I went into the bathroom and cried so hard I had to muffle the sound with a towel. Not because I still loved him, that feeling had died the moment I read those messages, but because I was mourning who I'd thought he was. The man I'd married, the father I'd believed Emma had. That man had never existed. By Friday morning, Lauren had everything ready. Court orders to freeze Tyler's accounts, divorce papers, a restraining order, an emergency custody motion giving me sole physical custody of Emma, and a referral to a prosecutor who specialized in financial crimes. We just needed one more thing, the right moment to serve him. Lauren suggested we wait until the weekend. Tyler had mentioned he was playing golf on Saturday morning. Another lie, probably another meetup with Vanessa. While he was gone, we'd have everything ready. Change the locks, pack his belongings, serve him with papers when he came back. I asked her if this would work, if we could really stop him from taking anything else, if we could protect Emma. Lauren looked at me with absolute certainty and told me that Tyler had made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated me. He'd assumed I'd never find out, and that even if I did, I'd be too scared or too broken to fight back. But I wasn't broken. I was angry, and anger, when channeled correctly, is an incredibly powerful weapon. Saturday morning came, and Tyler left the house at 7 a.m. with his golf clubs, whistling like he didn't have a care in the world. I'd already dropped Emma off at my mother's house, telling her we needed to handle some adult stuff and she'd have a fun sleepover with Grandma. Emma had looked at me with those knowing eyes and asked if this was about Daddy and the bad things. I told her yes, but that she didn't need to worry, that Mommy was fixing it. She hugged me so tight and whispered in my ear that I was the bravest person she knew. If only she knew how terrified I actually was. An hour after Tyler left, Lauren arrived with Derek, 2 process servers, and a locksmith. We worked fast, changed every lock on every door, packed Tyler's clothes, his toiletries, his belongings into boxes, and put them in the garage. Lauren had a court order giving me exclusive possession of the house. Tyler would have no legal right to be here anymore. By noon, everything was ready. We just had to wait for him to come home. I stood in my living room, my house, my space that I'd worked so hard for, and I realized something that made my hands stop shaking. I wasn't the victim in this story. Not anymore. Tyler thought he'd been playing me this whole time. It had just changed. And he didn't even know it yet. Tyler came home at 3 in the afternoon. I watched from the living room window as his car pulled into the driveway, and I felt my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. Lauren stood next to me, calm and collected in her navy suit. Derek was in the kitchen with the 2 process servers. The locksmith had finished an hour ago. Everything was ready. I saw Tyler get out of the car, still in his golf clothes, checking his phone. Probably texting Vanessa. Probably planning where they'd spend my money next. He walked up to the front door, and I heard him try his key. Didn't work. He tried again. Nothing. I could hear him outside, frustrated, jiggling. Then he started knocking, calling my name through the door. Lauren nodded at me. It's time. I opened the door, but I didn't step aside to let him in. Tyler looked at me, confused, that charming smile starting to form like he thought this was some kind of misunderstanding he could smooth over with the right words. He asked what was going on, why his key wasn't working. I didn't say anything. I just stepped back, and one of the process servers moved forward. He identified himself, confirmed Tyler's identity, and handed him a thick manila envelope. The divorce papers, the restraining order, the emergency custody order, the notice of criminal investigation. Tyler stared at the envelope like it was a bomb. Then he looked at me, and I saw the exact moment reality hit him. His face went white, then red, then this strange grayish color I'd never seen before. He asked me what the hell I thought I was doing. I finally spoke, told him to read the papers, that everything was explained there, but Tyler wasn't listening. He tried to push past me into the house, his voice getting louder, angrier. He said this was his home too, that I couldn't just lock him out, that I was being crazy. That's when Derek stepped in right behind him, the second process server who happened to be a sheriff's deputy. The deputy told Tyler he needed to calm down and step back from the property, that he'd been legally served and was no longer permitted on the premises. Tyler's whole body was shaking with rage. He kept looking at me like he couldn't believe I was actually doing this, like he'd been so sure I'd never figure it out, never fight back, never stand up for myself. He was still holding the envelope, and I watched as he ripped it open right there on the doorstep. Started scanning the first page, the divorce petition citing adultery and financial fraud. His eyes moved faster and faster down the page. Then he got to the part about the criminal charges. The accusations of forgery, identity theft, embezzlement, the evidence we'd compiled, the frozen accounts. He looked up at me, and for a second, I thought I saw actual fear in his eyes. Tyler tried a different approach. His voice got soft, pleading. He said we could talk about this, that I was misunderstanding everything, that yes, maybe he'd made some mistakes, but we could work it out. We had a daughter together. That word made something snap inside. I told him that family doesn't steal, family doesn't lie and cheat and forge signet to abandon their child, that he stopped being part of our family the moment he decided Vanessa and her future mattered more than Emma. Tyler's mask cracked completely then. He started yelling, saying I had no idea what I was talking about, that I couldn't prove anything, that those accounts were his money from bonuses and commissions, that I was just bitter and jealous. Lauren stepped forward then, calm as ever, and informed Tyler that we had proof of every transfer, every forged document, every message he'd sent planning his escape, that his iPad had provided quite the comprehensive evidence trail. I watched Tyler's face as he realized what she was saying. The iPad. The one he thought he'd gotten rid of. The one Emma had found. He actually stumbled backward, like the words had physically hit him. Derek added that the district attorney's office would be receiving our documentation on Monday morning, that Tyler should probably get himself a lawyer, a good one. The deputy told Tyler again that he needed to leave the property, that his belongings were packed in the garage, and he had 10 minutes to load them into his car and go. If he refused, he'd be arrested for trespassing. Tyler loaded his boxes in silence. I stood in the doorway and watched. Lauren next to me, making sure he didn't try it. He'd finished. He stood by his car and looked at me one more. He asked me if I really wanted to destroy him like this. If I understood what this would do to his life, his reputation. I almost laughed. The audacity of this man. He'd been planning to destroy my life for over a year, and now he wanted sympathy. I told him the only thing I wanted was to protect my daughter and recover what he'd stolen. That what happened to him after that was entirely his own fault. Tyler got in his car, but before he drove away, he did something that made my blood run cold. He smiled. Not a nice smile, cruel, knowing smile. He told me I had no idea what I was getting into, that if I pushed this, if I really went after him legally, he'd make sure I regretted it, that he had information I wouldn't want to come out, things that would hurt me more than they'd hurt him. Then he drove away, leaving me standing there with those words echoing in my head. Lauren immediately asked what he could possibly have on me. I told her I had no idea. I'd never done anything illegal, never hidden anything. My life was an open book, but Tyler's threat stayed with me all evening. After Lauren and Derek left, after I'd checked every lock twice and set the alarm, I sat in my empty house and couldn't shake this feeling of dread. What did Tyler think he had on me? What could he possibly use as leverage? I called my mom to check on Emma. She said my daughter was fine, helping make cookies, asking when she could come home. I told her soon. Maybe tomorrow. I just needed one more night to make sure everything was secure. After I hung up, I went through the house checking for anything Tyler might have planted. Cameras, recording devices, hidden documents. I know it sounds paranoid, but his threat had gotten under my skin. I didn't find anything. But I did find something else. In the back of Tyler's closet, behind a box of old shoes, there was a small fireproof safe I'd never seen before. It was locked and I didn't have the key, but it was light enough that I knew it did be documents, maybe more evidence. I took photos of it, sent them to Derek, and asked if he could get it open legally. He said he'd work on getting a warrant on Monday. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Tyler's smile, his threat, the safe. What else had my husband been hiding? And was I ready for whatever came next? Monday morning came, and I dropped Emma off at school like it was any normal day. She hugged me extra tight before running to join her friends, and I watched her go with this fierce protectiveness burning in my chest. Whatever Tyler was threatening, whatever he thought he had on me, couldn't let it touch her. Derek called me at noon. He'd gotten a warrant to open the safe. A locksmith was meeting us at the house in an hour, along with Lauren and a police detective who'd been assigned to Tyler's fraud case. Detective Morrison, Derek said, someone who'd seen plenty of financial abuse cases and knew exactly what we were dealing with. When they all arrived, I felt like my house had become a crime scene, which, in a way, it had been. The place where Tyler had systematically robbed me while I slept next to him, trusting him completely. The locksmith worked on the safe for 20 minutes before it finally clicked open. Detective Morrison pulled on gloves and carefully removed the contents while Lauren filmed everything for evidence. Inside, 3 things. First, a burner phone, the kind you buy with cash and use for things you don't want traced. Detective Morrison powered it on, and we waited while it loaded. When the home screen appeared, there was only one app being used. A messaging service I'd never heard of. Encrypted, Derek said, the kind people use when they're hiding something serious. The messages were all between Tyler and Vanessa, but these were different from the ones on the iPad from the past 2 weeks, after I'd already discovered everything and set my plan in motion. Tyler had warned Vanessa that I might be catching on, that she needed to be careful, take some time off work, lay low. Vanessa had responded asking if they should just run now, take what they had, and disappear. Tyler's response made my stomach turn. He said no, that if I was on to him, running would make him look guilty, that he had a backup plan, he called it, something that would keep me from pressing charges if things got ugly. Detective Morrison looked at me and asked if I had any idea what Tyler meant by insurance. I told him I didn't, that Tyler had threatened me on Saturday but hadn't specified what he had. The detective made a note and kept scrolling through the messages. That's when we found the photos. Pictures of documents. Tax returns from 3 years ago. Returns I didn't remember seeing. Detective Morrison zoomed in, and Lauren leaned over his shoulder. Her face went pale. She told me these returns showed income I'd never, almost $30,000 listed as cash payments for nursing consultations, work I'd supposedly done on the side, except I'd never done any consulting work. I'd never received those payments. This was completely fabricated. Tyler had created false tax returns in my name, filed them with the IRS, and kept copies as blackmail. Derek explained what this meant. If Tyler released these documents, if he claimed I'd been hiding income and committing tax fraud, I could be investigated by the IRS. Even though the returns were fake, even though I'd never filed them myself, proving my innocence would take time. Legal fees, stress, and the accusation alone could damage my nursing license. This was Tyler's insurance, his threat. If I came after him for stealing my money, he'd frame me for tax evasion. The rage I felt in that moment was like nothing I'd ever experienced. This man hadn't just stolen from me. He'd created an entire false crime to pin on me if I dared to fight back. But Detective Morrison smiled. Actually smiled. He told me this was the best thing that could have happened for our case. Because now we had proof of Tyler's intent to blackmail. We had evidence he'd created fraudulent documents. This wasn't just embezzlement. This was extortion. identity fraud, and filing false tax returns. The charges against Tyler had just gotten significantly worse, and the IRS would be very interested to know someone was creating fake returns in other people's names. Lauren was already on her phone, calling the assistant district attorney handling Tyler's case, telling her about the new evidence, about the safe, the phone, the blackmail scheme. The second item in the safe was a stack of cash, $15,000 in $100 bills. Derek counted it twice while Detective Morrison photographed every bill. This was probably Tyler's escape fund, money he'd been skimming that he hadn't deposited into his secret accounts, untraceable cash for when he and Vanessa finally ran. The third item made my heart stop. A passport, but not Tyler's passport. Emma's. He'd taken my daughter's passport and hidden it in a safe I didn't know existed. Lauren picked it up carefully, like it might explode, and we all understood what it meant. Tyler had been planning to take Emma with him. Detective Morrison's expression darkened. He told me this changed everything, that attempting to flee the country with a child during a custody dispute was parental kidnapping. That combined with everything else, Tyler was looking at serious prison time now. I couldn't speak. The thought of Tyler of my daughter disproven he was willing to lie, steal, and destroy anyone who got in it, I felt physically sick. Lauren put her hand on my shoulder. Was safe, that Tyler would never get near, that this passport was coming with us to court, and no judge would ever grant him unsupervised access after seeing this. Derek added that we should probably check if Tyler had gotten himself a passport too. A new one? Maybe under slightly different information, because if he was planning to run with Emma, he definitely had an exit strategy for himself. Detective Morrison made some calls. Within an hour, we had confirmation. Tyler had applied for a second passport 6 months ago, claiming his original was lost. It had been mailed to a P.O. box registered under Vanessa's name. They'd been planning this for half a year. Taking Emma, taking my money, leaving me with nothing but fake tax returns and a ruined life. Except they'd underestimated one thing. A 6-year-old girl who loved her mother enough to risk her father's anger by telling the truth. The next morning, Tyler's lawyer called Lauren. His name was Richard something, and apparently he was one of those expensive attorneys who represent white-collar criminals, the kind who wear $1,000 suits and think they can intimidate everyone into a settlement. Lauren put him on speakerphone in her office, and I listened as Richard offered us a deal. Tyler would return all the money he could access immediately, about $89,000. He'd surrender all claims to Emma, agree to supervised visitation only, and accept 5 years of probation. In exchange, we'd drop the criminal charges. No jail time, no felony conviction. Just probation and paying back most of what he stole. I looked at Lauren and she looked at me. We both knew what my answer would be. Lauren told Richard no, that we wanted full restitution of every penny, complete surrender of parental rights, child support, and Tyler would have to plead guilty to all charges. That if Richard wanted to avoid a trial, those were our terms. Richard laughed. Actually laughed. He said we were being unreasonable. That Tyler was a first-time offender, a father, a man who'd made some mistakes but didn't deserve to have his life destroyed. Lauren's voice went ice cold. She told Richard that his client had spent 18 months systematically robbing a nurse who worked 60-hour weeks to support their family. That Tyler had forged documents, created fake tax returns to blackmail his victim, and attempted to kidnap their daughter and flee the country. That calling these actions mistakes was insulting. Then she added one more thing. Something we'd discovered that morning. Derek had found evidence that Tyler had been doing this before. Not to me, to his previous girlfriend, a woman he'd dated for 3 years before we met. Derek had tracked her down and spoken to her over the weekend. Her name was Rachel, and her story was eerily similar to mine. Tyler had slowly taken control of her finances, opened credit cards in her name, racked up debt, and then disappeared one day with about $40,000. Rachel had tried to press charges, but Tyler had convinced the police it was a civil matter, a relationship dispute. He'd gotten away with it. When he met me, he just refined his technique. Lauren told Richard that we had Rachel's testimony, that Tyler was a serial fraudster who targeted financially stable women, gained their trust, and robbed them blind. That this wasn't a mistake, it was a pattern, and that pattern was going to land Tyler in prison whether Richard liked it or not. The line went quiet for a long moment. Then Richard said he'd talk to his client and get back to us. We never heard from Richard again. 2 days later, Tyler got a new lawyer, a public defender. Apparently his expensive attorney had dropped him once he realized how bad the evidence actually was. The case moved fast after that. The district attorney was furious when she saw the fake tax returns and the passport. She told us Tyler represented a flight risk and requested he be held without bail until trial. The judge agreed. Tyler was arrested on a Wednesday afternoon at his new apartment, a studio in a bad part of town, all he could afford now that his money had been frozen and he'd lost his job. Detective Morrison called to tell me they'd taken him into custody without incident. He'd be arraigned the next morning. I couldn't face Tyler in court. Not yet. But Lauren went, and she called me right after. Tyler had pleaded not guilty to all charges. His public defender had requested bail, arguing Tyler wasn't a flight risk, that he had ties to the community, that he deserved a chance to prepare his defense from home. The prosecutor had presented our evidence: the passports, the fake tax returns, the burner phone, Rachel's testimony about his previous fraud, the messages planning to flee the country. The judge had denied bail. Tyler would stay in jail until trial. Lauren said Tyler had looked shocked when the judge made the ruling, like he still couldn't believe this was actually happening to him, that he'd actually have to face consequences. I asked Lauren what happens next. She explained that Tyler's new lawyer would probably try to negotiate a plea deal, that going to trial with this much evidence would be suicide. But the DA wasn't interested in being generous, not with Tyler's history, not with the severity of his crimes. If Tyler wanted to avoid a trial, he'd have to agree to significant prison time, at least 3 to 5 years, full restitution, complete surrender of parental rights, and he'd be a convicted felon for the rest of his life. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how completely Tyler's life had fallen apart. He'd gone from having a wife, a daughter, a home, a career, and over $100,000 in stolen money to sitting in a jail cell with nothing. Part of me felt vindicated. This was justice. He'd earned every consequence. But another part of me just felt sad. Not for Tyler. He deserved what he got. But for Emma, for the father she'd thought she had. For the lies and the loss and the betrayal. I'd started seeing a therapist, and she'd told me something that stuck with me. She said that sometimes the hardest part of recovering from betrayal isn't the anger. It's accepting that the person you loved never actually existed, that they were always a mask, and underneath was someone capable of hurting you in ways possible. Tyler was that mask, and now that it had been ripped away, I had to accept who he really was. A week later, Tyler's public defender called Lauren with a new offer. Tyler would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for 5 years in prison instead of the 10 he was facing at trial. He'd agreed to full restitution, complete loss of parental rights, and would never contact Emma or me again once he was released. Lauren asked me what I wanted to do. I thought about Emma, about her asking me if I was happy, about her telling Sam that if he took my money, she'd tell on him too, about the weight she'd been carrying since that night she whispered her warning. I told Lauren to accept the deal, that I didn't want to put Emma through a trial, that 5 years was enough time for her to grow up without Tyler's poison in her life, that by the time he got out she'd be 13 and old enough to decide for herself if she ever wanted to see him again. Tyler took the deal. The sentencing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. This time, I went to court. I wanted to be there. I wanted Tyler to see me sitting in that courtroom, strong and standing, while the judge handed down his sentence. Tyler wouldn't look at me during the hearing. He kept his eyes down while the prosecutor read the list of his crimes, while the judge asked if he understood what he was pleading guilty to, while his lawyer made a pathetic statement about how Tyler was remorseful and had made terrible choices. Then the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I stood up, walked to the front of the courtroom, and I looked Tyler in the eye for the first time since the day I'd locked him out of our house. I told the judge about the night Emma whispered her warning, about discovering the betrayal, about the fake tax returns and the plans to kidnap my daughter, about Rachel and how Tyler had done this before. But I also told the judge that Tyler's actions had taught me to trust myself, to protect what was, to fight for my daughter and our future, that he'd tried to break me, and instead, he'd made me stronger. When I finished, I walked back to my seat without looking at Tyler again. He wasn't worth my attention anymore. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in state prison, ordered full restitution, terminated his parental rights permanently, and told Tyler that his actions represented the worst kind of betrayal, exploiting the trust of someone who'd loved him for nothing more than money. Tyler was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. I watched him go, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just relief that it was finally over. Lauren and I walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine. She asked me how I felt. I told her I felt for the first 18 months, maybe longer. I felt 3 days after Tyler's sentencing, I got a call from Detective Morrison. He said there was something I needed to see, something they'd found while executing a final search warrant on Tyler's apartment after his conviction. I met him at the police station that afternoon. Lauren came with me because by now, nothing Tyler-related happened without her by my side. Detective Morrison led us to a conference room where evidence boxes were stacked on the table. He explained that when they'd searched Tyler's apartment for any remaining assets or evidence, they'd found a laptop hidden inside a false bottom in his closet, the kind of hiding spot that takes deliberate effort to create. Tyler had been keeping secrets even from Vanessa. The laptop was password protected, but the forensics team had cracked it. What they found made Detective Morrison call me immediately. He opened the laptop and turned the screen toward me. It was full of folders, dozens of them, each labeled with a woman's name and a year. Rachel, 2015, Jennifer, 2012, Amy, 2010, Melissa, 2008, and at the end, Isla, 2017. My hands went cold. Lauren leaned forward, her jaw tight. Detective Morrison clicked on Jennifer's folder. Inside were documents, bank statements, credit reports, scanned IDs, passwords written in a text file, photos of Jennifer at her home, at work, in her car, surveillance photos she clearly didn't know were being taken, and a file labeled Exit Strategy that detailed exactly how Tyler planned to drain her accounts and disappear. He'd done this to at least 6 women that we knew of, maybe more. Each folder was the same: detailed reconnaissance, financial information, escape plans. Tyler hadn't just been stealing from women. He'd been studying them, hunting them, executing the same con over and over for at least 15 years. I was just his latest victim, the one who finally caught him. Detective Morrison told me the FBI was now involved, that this laptop proved Tyler had been engaged in a multi-state fraud scheme, that the other women were being contacted, and some were in states where the statute of limitations hadn't run out yet. Tyler was going to be facing federal charges on top of his state conviction. His 5-year sentence? That was just the beginning. I asked if I could see my folder. Detective Morrison hesitated, then opened it. The first file was titled Initial Assessment. Tyler had written notes about me from before we even started dating. My job, my income, my student loans, the fact that I owned my condo outright. He'd targeted me deliberately, saw me at a hospital charity event, researched me, and engineered our chance meeting at a coffee shop 2 weeks later. Everything about our relationship had been calculated. The courtship, the marriage proposal, the decision to have Emma, all of it was part of a timeline Tyler had mapped out to maximize how much he could take from me before I noticed. There was even a file labeled Contingencies that detailed what he'd do if I discovered the truth. The fake tax returns, the passport plan, alternative identities he'd researched, bank accounts in other countries. Tyler had been prepared for me to catch on. He'd just never expected it to happen because of Emma. That was his only miscalculation. He'd underestimated a 6-year-old girl. Lauren asked Detective Morrison what would happen to Vanessa. He said she was cooperating with investigators. Turned out Vanessa hadn't known about Tyler's history. She thought she was his first affair, his one true love. When detectives showed her the laptop and explained she was just the latest accomplice in a 15-year con, she'd broken down completely. Vanessa had agreed to testify against Tyler in the federal case. She was facing charges too: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, but her cooperation would likely mean probation instead of prison. She'd sent me a letter through her lawyer. I hadn't opened it yet. Part of me never wanted to read it, but another part was curious what she could possibly say. That night, after Emma was asleep, I sat in my kitchen and opened Vanessa's letter. It was 3 pages, handwritten, tear-stained in places. She apologized profusely, said she'd never meant to hurt me or Emma, that Tyler had told her I was abusive, that our marriage was over, that I'd been the one stealing. She'd believed every lie. Vanessa wrote that when she saw the evidence, when she understood what Tyler really was, she'd felt physically sick, that she'd lost her job, her apartment, her reputation, that her family had disowned her, that she understood if I hated her, but she wanted me to know the truth. She'd been a victim too, just a different kind. I put the letter down and stared at it for a long time. Was Vanessa a victim? Maybe. She'd definitely been manipulated, but she'd also helped Tyler steal from me. She'd laughed about it in those messages, called me an idiot who'd never notice. I decided I didn't have space in my life for forgiveness right now. Maybe someday, but not today. The federal indictment came through 2 weeks later. Tyler was charged with wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and interstate fraud. The charges carried a potential 20-year sentence. Combined with his state conviction, Tyler was looking at spending most of his life in prison. His public defender tried one last time to negotiate, offered a guilty plea in exchange for concurrent sentences, meaning Tyler would serve the federal and state time simultaneously, not back to back. The federal prosecutor asked me what I thought, if I wanted to keep fighting or let Tyler take the deal. I thought about all those women in those folders: Jennifer, Amy, Rachel, Melissa, women who'd never gotten justice because Tyler had been too careful, too smart, too manipulative. I told the prosecutor to reject that Tyler needed to face every single consequence of every single crime, that those women deserved to see him answer for what he'd done to them too. The prosecutor smiled and said she'd been hoping I'd say that. Tyler's federal trial was scheduled for 6 months later. I didn't plan to attend. I'd already given my testimony in depositions. I'd already faced him in court once. I didn't need to see him again. But I did need to do one more thing. I contacted Rachel through the Victim Advocate Program, asked if she wanted to meet for coffee. She said yes. We met at a quiet cafe in Boulder on a Saturday morning. Rachel was older than me by about 8 years, with kind eyes and an exhausted smile I recognized. The smile of someone who'd fought hard and was still standing. We talked for 3 hours, about Tyler's patterns, about how he'd manipulated us, about the shame we'd both felt, wondering how we'd been so blind, so stupid. But Rachel said something that changed my perspective. She told me we weren't stupid, that Tyler was a professional predator who'd spent years perfecting his tech. That blaming ourselves was exactly what he wanted, for us to feel too ashamed to fight back. The fact that we'd both fought anyway, that made us warriors. Rachel had never been able to prosecute Tyler. Her evidence hadn't been enough back then. But now, with the laptop, with the pattern established, her case was being reopened. She'd finally get her justice, too. When we hugged goodbye, Rachel told me to thank Emma for her, that if my daughter hadn't spoken up, Tyler would still be out there, still hunting, still destroying lives. Promised I would. That evening I sat down with Emma before bed. She was 8 now, older and wiser than 8-year-old should have to, but she was happy, thriving in school, smiling more. The nightmares had stopped months ago. I told her about Rachel, about the other women, about how her bravery that night had saved not just us, but helped stop Tyler from hurting anyone else. Emma thought about this seriously, then asked me a question that broke my heart. She wanted to know if Daddy had ever really loved us, or if it had all been pretend. I chose my words carefully. Told her I didn't know if Tyler was capable of love the way we understood, that some people are so broken inside they can only see other people as things to use, but that it didn't matter, because the love in our family now, between Emma and me, with Grandma, with the people who actually cared about us, that love was real. Emma nodded, satisfied with that answer. Then she asked if Sam was coming over tomorrow for our movie night. I smiled. Yes, Sam was coming over. Sam, who'd met Emma 6 months ago and had been patient and respectful, who brought Emma books and made her laugh and never tried to replace her father, just showed her what a good man actually looked like. Emma liked Sam. More importantly, she trusted him. And after everything my daughter had been through, her trust was something sacred. 2.5 years after that night, Emma whispered her warning. I sat in my backyard watching her play with our new dog, a golden retriever puppy she'd named Honey. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. Tyler was in federal prison in Pennsylvania. He'd been sentenced to 18 years after his trial. With good behavior, he'd be out when he was 63. Emma would be 26, an adult who could make her own choices about whether she ever wanted to see him again. Personally, I doubted she would. Emma barely mentioned him anymore. When she did, it was matter of fact, clinical. My biological father was how she referred to him now. The man had become a cautionary tale in her life, not a presence. I'd recovered $92,000 so far. Tyler's restitution payments came monthly, automatically deducted from the prison job he was required to work, $23 a month. At that rate, it would take him another 100 years to pay back what he'd stolen. But the federal government had seized some of his hidden assets, bank accounts in the Cayman Islands we didn't even know existed. That money was being distributed among his victims. I'd probably get another $40,000 over the next few years. The rest, I'd accepted it was gone. Money could be earned again. the time I'd lost, the trust that had been shattered, those were harder to recover. But I was working on it. Therapy had helped, both for me and for Emma. We'd processed the trauma together, learned healthy ways to talk about what had happened, and slowly rebuilt our sense of safety in the world. I'd been promoted to director of nursing at the hospital. He wasn't lost on me. Tyler had tried to destroy my career with those fake tax returns, and instead, I'd ended up thriving professionally. The hospital administration had been incredibly supportive throughout the whole My story had even been featured in a nursing journal as an example of financial abuse awareness. I'd started speaking at women's groups and financial literacy workshops, sharing my experience, helping other women recognize the warning signs I'd missed, teaching them to protect themselves, to check their accounts, to never give anyone complete control over their finances, no matter how much they trusted them. My nightmare could help even one woman avoid the same fate, then something good had come from it. Sam and I had been dating officially for almost a year now. He'd proposed last month. Nothing fancy, just the three of us on a hike Emma loved, with Sam getting down on one knee and asking both of us if we'd be his family. Emma had said yes before I could even answer. Then she'd looked at me with those wise, knowing eyes and asked if I was sure, if I was happy. If this was what I'd told her yes, that I was sure, that Sam was nothing like her biological father, that some people choose to build you up instead of tearing you down, and Sam was that kind of person. We were getting married in the fall. Small ceremony, just close friends and family. Emma would be the flower girl. She'd already picked out her dress. Purple with sparkles, very her. Life wasn't perfect. I still had moments of anxiety when I checked my bank accounts, needing to see that the numbers were right, that nothing was missing. I still had nightmares sometimes about Tyler taking Emma, even though I knew he couldn't. But those moments were getting, the anxiety was fake. Nightmares were rare now. What remained was gratitude. Gratitude that Emma had been brave enough to tell me that Lauren and Derek had fought beside, that the justice system, for once, had actually worked. That I'd been strong enough to fight back instead of accepting defeat. Emma called me from across the yard, asking if Sam could teach her to ride a bike this weekend. She was 8, almost 9, and still learning. Tyler had always said he'd teach her, but never did. Just another promise he'd broken. I told her yes, Sam would love to teach her, and I knew he actually would. Because that's what people who love you do. They show up, they keep their promises. They build you up instead of tearing you down. As the sun finished setting and Emma played with dimming light, I thought about that night 2.5 years ago. The moment my daughter whispered her warning and saved us both. Emma had been 6 years old, just a little girl who loved her parents and her stuffed, but she'd been brave enough to do the hardest thing she'd ever done. Tell the truth even when it was scary. She'd saved our lives that night. Saved us from financial ruin, from Tyler's plan to kidnap her, from years more of abuse and lies. My daughter was my hero, and I told her that every day. The lesson I'd learned, the one I shared at every talk I gave, every workshop I taught, was this. Listen to the people who love you. Pay attention to the warning signs. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. And most importantly, never let anyone convince you that their betrayal is your fault. Tyler had tried to destroy me. He'd tried to take everything I'd worked for and leave me with nothing but shame and debt and fake criminal charges. But he'd failed, because he'd underestimated 2 things. First, he'd underestimated Emma, a 6-year-old girl who knew right from wrong and was brave enough to act on. And second, he'd underestimated me. He'd thought I was too busy, too trusting, too weak to fight back. He'd been wrong about that too. I called Emma in. She came running, Honey bouncing beside her, her face flushed and happy. We ate together at the kitchen table, and she told me about her day, her friends, her excitement about the bike riding lessons. Normal life, beautiful, ordinary, precious normal life. The kind of life Tyler had tried to steal from us, but we'd taken it back, together, and we were never letting go. Before I finish, I want to ask you something. If you've been following this story, if it's meant something to you, would you do me a favor? Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to know where you are in the world. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about people who fought back, go ahead and subscribe. There are so many more stories out there that need so many who stood up and said, not me, not any my story. The story of how my 6-year-old daughter saved us both, how we survived betrayal and came out stronger on the other side. For listening, for being here with meaningful revelation and every small victory. And remember, if someone you love tells you something is wrong, listen. It might just save your life too.